How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Aleph, Daf 11 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, Daf 11, we wrap up the first Mishnah of Masechta Zevachim, and that is what we will get up to on this Daf. We will get to the next Mishnah and we will stop there. That's the plan. The first of four sections of today's daf is when blood of a korbin enters into the Heichal. There are only specific korbanis that go into the Heichal. Those are the chatas, pnimios. Of course, Yom Kippur is coming up. Of course, the avodah of Yom Kippur happens inside the Heichal, specifically inside the Kodesh HaKodashim even. But otherwise, all korbanis remain in the Azarya. They don't go into the Heichal. What happens if the blood of a korbin goes into the Heichal? That will be the exploration of the first section of Daf Yud Aleph of Masechta Zevachim. Section number 2, final comments on the asham lishmah debate. Of course, we are in the midst of the exploration of Rabbi Eliezer's opinion from the Mishnah, which was that in addition to the korbin chatas and korbin pesach, the korbin asham as well, a machshava shelo lishmah, will be possible. So we are going to wrap up that discussion, and then as we close in on the first Mishnah of Masechta Zevachim, we will explore the final two opinions in our Mishnah. Firstly, the opinion of Yosef ben Choni, who had said that just like if one were to slaughter the korbin pesach or the korbin chatas as another korbin, it would be possible. Well, guess what? If you slaughter another korbin as a korbin pesach or as a chatas, it is also going to be possible. So when we say that, for example, a shlamim that is slaughtered shelo lishma is kosher, well, it's kosher if it was slaughtered as an ola. But if it's slaughtered as a chatas or a korbin pesach, Yosef ben Choni would say that is possible. We will have a deeper look into that opinion. And then finally, the final opinion in the first Mishnah of Masechta Zevachim, which is that of Shimin achi Azarya, who had said that it depends if you're slaughtering a koche kochim as a kochim kalim or a kochim kalim as a koche kochim, and we will have a look at that opinion, which will get us to the next Mishnah of our parak, which we will not do today. We will begin with that tomorrow, which means that we will have some work to do tomorrow on the Daf Yud Aleph base. But that is the plan. Tomorrow we'll just kind of go Mishnah to Mishnah. That's what I'm thinking. But anyways, that is what we have in store for us on Daf Yud Aleph Masechta Zevachim. Let's get it. All right, friends. We are going to begin on Daf Yud Amid Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Last word on the line at the 2 dots. Tnan. Awesome. We learned over there. Where? On Daf Pei Aleph. That's exciting. Gives us something to look forward to in another 2.5 months. Rabbi Akiva would say, Kol damim shenichnusu leichol lechaper psulim v'chachom chatas bilvad. Rabbi Eliezer Omer afa asham shem chatas ko asham. Now, let me point out that there is a pasuk that the Gemara has not yet quoted, but the pasuk says, I'm going to read it, V'chol chatas asher yuva midama el ol moed lechaper b'kodesh lo seyocha boish tisarif. Did you hear that? I'll read it again. Any korban chatas whose blood is brought into the Heichal, lo seyochel, cannot be eaten by ishtisarif. So the blood of a korban chatas that is brought into the Heichal is possible. You have to burn it. You can't even eat the korban chatas either. Right? It's a big problem if the blood goes into the Heichal. Now the thing is that we only talked about a chatas there. So now says the Gemara. So Tananos, we learn over there in Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva would say kol dam shenichnusu leichol chab psulim. So Rabbi Akiva says he doesn't stop. What is right? My Rabbi Akiva kochim kalim meribuya. Okay, fine. So it sounds like we're not going to worry too much, I don't think, about Rabbi Akiva's opinion right now, but basically he doesn't limit it to the korban chatas. He says it actually applies to all korbanos. So all korbanis, if their blood goes into the Heichal, it's going to be a problem. Okay, fine. The Chacham take the pasuk literally, and they say korbin chatas. If a korbin chatas goes into the Heichal, so then it's a problem. But that's it. Now Rabbi Eliezer, Omer afa asham, shneimar kachatas ko asham, and Rabbi Eliezer adds the korban asham, like he had said earlier on Daf Yud Amud Beis, about 10-15 lines into the page. He says the same pasuk as he's quoting now, kachatas ko asham. The pasuk compares the chatas and the asham, and therefore, just like a korban chatas, whose blood goes into the heichal, big problems. So also that would apply to korban asham as well. Kachatas ko asham. What applies to a chatas applies to an asham. So I understand Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, who he says that it's not limited to the chatas, it's also the asham, that the blood of an asham that goes into the heichal, big problems, korbin's puzzle. So he explains his reason. He says, kachatas ko asham. My time, but what's pshat with the rabbis? Why? What do the rabbis say to Rabbi Eliezer's argument? What about kachatas ko asham? Why do the rabbis say it's only the korbin chatas, not the korbin asham? Omarove says Rove asham nichnas damo lifnim poselo motzes omer. Well, says Rava, you can't say that. You can't say like Rabbi Eliezer. You can't say that if the blood of a korban asham goes in to the heichal, the korban is partial. You can't say that. Kal v'chomer me'ola, because we have a kal v'chomer from a korban ola, like we similarly tried learning earlier, I believe, on the Amud. Ma ola she kolil nichnas dam lifnim kshera. Well, so according to Rabbi Akiva, he said that any korban that the dam goes into the heichal, it's possible. But if you're not Rabbi Akiva, if you're the Chachamim or Rabbi Eliezer, well then the Chacham say it's only the korban chatas. Rabbi Eliezer adds the asham, but they would both agree that a korban ola, if its blood went into the heichal, the korban would still be kosher. So now let's draw a kal v'chomer. If you have a korban ola, which is more stringent, after all, the whole korban is burnt on the mizbeach, entirely burnt on the mizbeach. And yet, if its blood goes into the heichal, the korban remains kosher. So again, ma'ola, when it comes to korban ola, shehi kalil, which is so stringent that the whole korban is burnt. And yet, nichnas dam lifnim kshera, if its blood goes into the heichal, it's okay. That's not going to ruin, it's not a showstopper for the korban ola. It's not going to ruin the korban ola. So therefore, asham she'eino kalil, an asham which is more lenient in that it's not entirely burnt on the mizbeach. Lo kol shekain, certainly lenient asham who's not entirely burnt on the mizbeach. Certainly, if its blood goes into the heichal, it shouldn't be a showstopper either. So ma'ala ola shekain eino michaperes. To which Gemara says, wait. You think korban ola is so stringent? It's not. It's not even mechaper. It doesn't even have any kind of atonement. We talked about mitzvah seseh, but then we also talked about it's a gift. Let's not go there. As opposed to korban asham, which brings a kapara, right? The person was over on me'ilah, or even he lied about stealing, right? Asham me'ilah, so it's going to bring a kapara to a person who sinned. Well, that makes asham a big deal. So, okay, fine. So, ola, if its blood goes into the heichal, it's not going to ruin the korban. But asham is a different league. It creates kapara, which is something that an ola can't touch. Again, mala ola shekain eina mechaperes. Korban ola doesn't even bring kapara, doesn't even bring atonement. But asham does, and therefore I'll argue that a korban asham, its blood will, if it goes into the heichal, will ruin the korban. Minchas chote tochiach. Okay, but I'll throw at you minchas chote. Minchas chote obviously brings atonement. So minchas chote comes for sinning. It's going to bring atonement for sinning, and yet, if its blood goes into the heichal, it remains kosher. Wait, what? The blood of a minchas chote? Flour doesn't have blood. So let's explain that over again. A minchas chote, which of course comes for a sinner, but it's merely a flour offering. There's no blood in a flour offering. So certainly it is not going to be puzzle if it's non-existent blood, right? It's not shaykh to the whole puzzle, blood going into the Heichal. So therefore, you have a minchas chote, which has atonement, and there's no blood making it puzzle. So therefore, I'll say the korbin asham, even though it has atonement, its blood going into the Heichal is not going to make it puzzle either. V'lema chatas of tochiach. Now, why resort to minchas chote? Why not suggest chatas of? Because after all, chatas of at least has some blood. It might not be an animal, but at least it has blood, right? Why are we talking about minchas chote, which is flour, doesn't even have blood? Right? If we're talking about blood going into Eichel, you may as well use chatas of, right? Which is why I got confused the first time, because I thought that's what it was talking about, the chatas of, but no, it's talking about the minchas chote. Minchas chote, of course, is brought for, as we learned about in the Masechta Shavuos, the korban olav yored, right? A person tumas mitas rekadosh of whatever, if he can't afford it, so the lower, right, minchas korban olav yored. If he can afford it, he brings an animal, otherwise birds. If not, then he brings a flour offering. So that's a minchas chote, and that will be have atonement. Now the Gemara asks, why didn't we try to bring the raya from chatas of? At least there's blood in the boyd. Well, the Gemara answers, chatas of boyd rab oven he, because actually chatas of is not so poshut. It's taka machloikis. It's taka machloikis. If the blood of the chatas of going into the Heichal is going to ruin the korbin. So let's not bring a raya from this. We bring a raya from minchas chote. No. So Eliezer says that if the blood of the asham goes into the heichal, it ruins the korbin. Chacham says no, it doesn't. Only the chatas, not in asham. And they said, right. So we're trying to figure out why. We said, well, because if an ola, which is more stringent, and yet its blood isn't going to ruin it, right? So in asham, which is less stringent because it's not entirely burnt, so then certainly its blood should ruin it. We say, yeah, but the asham has atonement powers, right? So therefore it's more stringent. We said, yeah, but minchas chote also has atonement powers, and it's not going to ruin anything inside. So ma le minchas chote shechein eina min zevach. Yeah, but don't bring me proofs and kal v'chomers from minchas chotes to teach me rayas about ashams. An asham is an animal offering. A flour offering is not an animal. It's not a zevach. It's flour. Ola tochiach. Okay, so then let's jump back to the korbin ola and say that the ola is entirely burnt, and yet its blood does not passel the korbin if it goes into the heichal. V'chozer adin. But then we return and we say, yeah, but the ola doesn't even mechaper. Lo rizeh k'rizeh v'lo rizeh k'rizeh. Well, the nature of this is not like the nature of that, and the nature of that is not like the nature of this. Atzara shavash ben. However, what is the common denominator between a korbin ola and a minchas chote? Shein kodshe kodshim. That they're both kodshe kodshim, and ola is kodshe kodshim. A chatas, a minchas chote is kodshe kodshim. V'nichnas lifnim ksherin. And if they go into the heichal, they remain kosher. Afani avi asham shu kodesh kodshim. So I will also extend that to an asham to say that just like the ola and the minchas chote, a korban asham as well is kodshe kodshim, and if its blood goes into the eichel, it will remain kosher. Amalei Rab mi barnish the Ravashi v'lifroch malat tzara shavash shabayin shekein ein lo in kitzba. Rav mi barnish says to Ravashi, but wait. I could still argue that korbin ola and minchas and korbin minchas chote as a team, as a thing, as a bundle, is more lenient than an asham, because in asham has a fix as a specific price that you have to pay for it. Masha'en kain by a minchas chote or a korbin ola, right? The Torah says, right, 2 shekels for the Torah actually gives a price that you have to pay for in asham, which is 2 shekels. No such price requirement exists for an ola or a minchas chote, making the asham more stringent because of this price requirement. So again, but let's ask, that between the ola and the minchas chote, they are more lenient than in asham. Shekin ein lein kitzba, they don't have a price requirement, a required price. Tomar be'asham sheyesh lo kitzba, that is no match for a korban asham, which actually has a required price, and therefore an asham is more stringent, and maybe its blood going into the Heichal will ruin it. Ella hainu taimayu derabanan. This is the reason for the rabbis who say that only the korban chatas' blood going into the Heichal will ruin the korban, but the blood of the asham going into the Heichal will not ruin the korban asham, because the pasuk says dama shel zo velo dama shel acher. Right, the pasuk says in the pasuk that I read at the very beginning of the daf. I'm going to read the pasuk again. V'chol chatas asher yuva midama. Any korban chatas that its blood goes elo moed lechaper b'kodesh lo seyachol beish tisarif. It's a problem. The korban is ruined. Dama, its blood of a korban chatas. That's it. Nothing else. Not even a korban asham. V'idach, whereas Rabbi Eliezer would respond, Dama v'lo b'sara. No, Dama is not to exclude a korban asham. No, korban asham is included. What's excluded from Dama is Dama v'lo b'sara. We're talking about the blood going into the Heichal, not the meat going into the Heichal. V'idach, but the Chacham would respond, Dama. It could have said Dam, but it says Dama, so we can learn out 2 things. We can learn out, like you're saying, that we're talking about the blood and not the meat, but we also learn out chatas to the exclusion of asham. V'idach, Rabbi Eliezer would respond, dam dama lo darish. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't have this 2-tier dam dama thing. There's only dama, which is to the exclusion of velo bisara, but korban asham would be included, and therefore where we leave things are, the chachamim hold that only the blood of a chatas that goes into the heichal is going to ruin the korban, i.e. the korban chatas. However, the blood of a korban asham going into the Heichal will not ruin the korban asham, according to the Chachamim. According to Rabbi Eliezer, he says, you better bet your bottom dollar, ka chatos, ka asham, it's one and the same, and if the blood of a chatos is going to ruin the korban chatos, the blood of the asham going into the Heichal is going to ruin the korban asham. And that is their opinions. Of course, there was also the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who said that all korbanis, if their blood goes into the Heichal, it will ruin whatever korban it is. But we didn't really explore that opinion. Now we're going to, it looks like, probably save that for a few months from now. Okay, and now we are going to wrap up the final comments on the asham lishmah debate. So, of course, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion was that he had added that also a korban asham, that is one of the avodas are done shelo lishmah, would be possible, whereas the chachamim had said in asham shelo lishmah would be like every other korban shelo lishmah, meaning other than chatas and korban pesach, and it would be kosher ela shelo alu levalim shem chovos. So now says the Gemara, bish lama l'rabonon. I understand according to the Rabbonon, the Amrei asham sheshchato shelo lishmo kosher. Okay, so according to the Rabbanon, who say that in asham that is slaughtered shelo lishmo is kosher, a chatas is possible, but an asham is kosher. So hanu the iskash mincha lechatos, mincha leasham. So here is the thing: a korban mincha is compared both to a korban chatas and to a korban asham, meaning that there are differences between the korban chatas and the korban asham. The Sanya, as we learned in the Brayso, Reb Shimin, or says Reb Shimin, kodesh kodashim hi kachatas v'cho asham. It says by a korban mincha. I'm going to read the pasuk by a korban mincha. Lo se ofe chometz Chelkom nasati osa meishai, kodesh kadoshim hi, kachatos v'cha'asham. That a korbin mincha is kodesh kadoshim like a chatas and an asham. Minchas chote areu kechatos, that a minchas chote, such as by the korbin olav yored, harei kechatos, is like a korbin chatas, and therefore, lefichach komtza shelo lishmah psula. And therefore, if the kmitza was shelo lishmah, it's psula. Let's go weiter for a second. Minchas nedova arei keasham. Whereas a minchas nedova, if somebody says, I'm going to bring a korbin mincha, I want to bring a korbin mincha, I'm going to bring a korbin mincha. It's not for a korbin chatas, but just he's going to bring a korbin mincha. Lefichach komtza shelo lishma kishera. So nedova ke asham, it's like a korbin asham, lefichach, and therefore, kmatza shelo lishma kshera, if the kmitza was shelo lishma, it is kshera. So this was the opinion of Reb Shimin. So now, what's kmitza? I think that we had discussed this the other day, right? That of course there are 4 avodas when it comes to korbin mincha that align with the 4 avodas that are by a zevach, by an animal, right? The shchita, kabbalah, halacha, zrika. By a mincha, you have kmitza, nesina, holacha, and haktara, right? That you take the fistful, that's like the shchita, that's the taking of the fistful, and then you put it in the klisharis, that's like the blood going into the klisharis. You then take it over to the mizbeach, that is like taking the blood over to the mizbeach, and by the blood you throw it on the mizbeach, and you throw the blood on the side of the mizbeach, and by the mincha you burn the fistful on the mizbeach. So therefore, what Reb Shimin is saying is that kodesh kadoshim kachatos v'ka'asham. That says Reb Shimin that when the pasuk compares a korbin mincha to a chatas and to an asham, what it's saying is that a korbin minchas chote is like a chatas, and therefore, just like by a chatas, if you were to slaughter it shelo lishma, the korbin would be possible. Well, if you do kmitza for a minchas chote shelo lishma, well then it will be possible. And v'cha asham, says Reb Shimin, that a minchas nedava, a voluntary mincha offering, is like an asham in that by a korbin asham, if you were to slaughter it shelo lishma, it would be kshera. So also a korbin a minchas nedava, if you do the kmitza, the festival shelo lishma, it's also kshera. So says the Gemara, I understand the opinion of the rabbis who make a distinction between a chatas and an asham, that a chatas that's slaughtered shelo, right, that the avodah is done shelo lishma is psula, and asham is kshera. So now I understand the opinion of Reb Shimin. But what about Reb Eliezer, who says that chatas and ashams are the same? So what's the deal with kachatos v'kasham and with this distinction to be made? Let's read it again. Pishtam the Rabbanon, I understand according to Rabbanon the Amri that they say asham sheshchatu shelo lishmo kosher, that a korban asham that's slaughtered shelo lishmo is kosher. Hainu the iskash mincha the chatos mincha the asham. Now I understand why a mincha is compared to a chatos as well as to an asham. Tisan is we learn in the Brayso Reb Shimin Omer says Reb Shimin kodesh kadoshim, that the korban mincha is kodesh kadoshim kachatos v'cha asham. Minchas chote arei hi kechatos, that a minchas chote is like a korban chatos, lefichach kmotza shelo lishma psula, and therefore if the kmitza was shelo lishma, the mincha is psula, just like a chatos is psula. Minchas nedava arei ke asham, lefichach kmotza shelo lishma ksher. And minchas nedava is like a korban asham, and therefore, if the kmitza of the korban mincha is shelo lishma, it's kshera, just like an asham would be kshera. Elu Rabbi Eliezer, l'may ilchusa iskash mincha nechatos umincha leasham. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, then what's the dealio with the korban mincha being compared to both a chatos and to an asham? Right, Rabbi Shimin told us about the distinction between the chatas and asham. If Rabbi Eliezer says that the chatas and asham have the same halachas, then what's the deal with the mincha being compared to both the chatas and an asham? What's the distinction? The chi idach, the Rabbi Shimin Well, Rabbi Eliezer would say there's actually another opinion of Reb Shimin, which is this nan that we learn in a Mishnah. Shelo bichli shares psula. Reb Shimin machshir. If so a korbin mincha, after the so basically a korbin mincha has two klisharis. We discussed this the other day, that basically you take a non-klisharis, a non-special Beis Hamikdashi vessel, and you add a little oil, then you add some flour, you add a little bit more oil, and then you transfer it to the first klisharis. Then I think you finish putting the rest of the oil in. Then you take that klisharis over to the kohen who's by the mizbeach. The kohen then takes the fistful from the first klisharis and puts it into the second klisharis, and then from the second klisharis he brings it to the mizbeach and burns it on the mizbeach. Now, what if the kohen didn't, after he took the fistful, he didn't put it into a klisharis? He just walked right up to the top of the mizbeach and burnt it. Then what happens? So, that's not that we learn in Mishnah. Lo b'klisharis psulos. Tanakama says that if the kmitza is, if the kometz is burnt on the mizbeach without first being placed in a klisharis, psula. You gotta put it in the klisharis. It's a critical step, right? It's a ma'akiv step. Reb Shimin machshir. Reb Shimin says it's okay. That if you take the kometz and walk it to the top of the mizbeach and burn it, it's fine. It's kosher. V'amar of Yehuda braid Reb Chia my time the Reb Shimin. How come Reb Shimin says it's okay? Oh my God, because the pasuk says Kodesh Kadoshim hi chatas asham. Because by a korbin mincha it says Kodesh Kadoshim chatas asham, that a korbin mincha is like a chatas and it's like in asham. But of the biyad of the biyamin kichatos. If he's going to do the avoda directly with his hand, if he's not going to place the kometz into a klisharis, if he's going to take the kometz and walk directly up to the top of the mizbeach and burn the kometz at the top of the mizbeach, if he's going to do that, then he's got to do it with his right hand, like the korban chatas. The korban chatas, the blood of a korban chatas is applied directly to the corners of the mizbeach, to the corners of the mizbeach, as we mentioned yesterday. That is with the right hand. Bichli, so you add two words, bala'ovda. Okay, I can add those two words. Bichli. Now, if you want to use a klisharis, if you're going to take the kometz and deposit it in a klisharis and then take the klisharis to the top of the mizbeach, in bala ovda bechli ovda besmol, then you can even use your left hand. That's the opinion of Reb Shimin. I think it's going to be a machlokas. Ka'asham, like a korbin asham. So Rabbi Eliezer says that actually there are two opinions. There are actually two brises, or maybe one brisa and one mishnah, whatever it is. Reb Shimin seems to be darshaning that pasuk in two ways, and the Gemara is about to ask how come. But Reb Shimin seems to be darshaning that pasuk in two ways, kachatos v'kasham. So we were asking a question in Rabbi Eliezer, what do you do with kachatos v'kasham? Rabbi Eliezer says, I'll tell you. You learn it from kachatos ka'asham, not about lishmah, but rather that the opinion of Reb Shimin is that a korbin mincha does not have to be the kometz does not have to be deposited in the klisharis, and depending, if you are going to deposit a mincha in a klisharis, well then it's ka'asham, i.e. it can even be brought to the top of the mizbeach with your left hand. But if you're going to deposit the kometz directly onto the fires of the mizbeach, so then you would have to use your right hand, kachatos. That's kachatas kashim. Now, Frek the Gemara, Shimin Heichal, Mapikle Lachi, Mapikle Lachi. What's the deal? How come Reb Shimin is using the same pasuk of Kodesh Koloshim kachatas v'kashim? One time to talk about lishmah, another time to talk about klei sharis. no, does he learn the pasuk this way or does he learn the pasuk that way? So, and for the Gemara, Ikr Kral look, the main way that Reb Shimin, or certainly Rabbi Eliezer would say this, is that the main way that Reb Shimin is darshaning the pasuk is like we just said, kachatas v'ka'asham, kachatas if the kohen opts not to use the klisharis, ka'asham if the kohen opts to use the klisharis. Uminchas chote the psula shelo lishmah, and when we talked about earlier that a minchas chote shelo lishmah is psula, just like a korban chatas shelo lishmah is psula. Tama achrina hu. So the truth is that actually is coming from there's another reason for that. It's not because of kachatas ka'asham. Chatas taima mai dichsiv bei hi. Well, what's the reason? How do we know by korban chatas that we've been saying that korban chatas has to be lishmah and none of the other korbanis have to be lishmah? What did the pasuk say? I'm going to read the pasuk. V'samach yoda avrosh asar v'shachat also b'kom asher yishchat ezol l'fnei Hashem chatasi. Right, lishma, ksherish lo lishma psula. Right, chatas he. It says he by chatas, and it has to be lishma. So minchas chote nami. So also when it comes to minchas chote, guess what it says? Ksivba he. It says there as well he. The pasuk is v'imlosa seyalush teisor mishabiyona, etc., etc., etc. Right, that's the pasuk by the korban the minchas chote, and it says he at the end of that pasuk. So just like korban chatos has to be lishma, so that's how we know that a minchas chote also has to be lishma. It's not really actually learned out from kachatos kahosham. So now the Gemara asks an awesome question. You know, Rabbi Eliezer's got sort of the das yochid. You know, we don't. You know, the chachamim say that it's just a korban chatas and korban pesach, but it's not an asham, right? So korban chatas that needs to be lishma, otherwise it's possible. Not a korban asham. Rabbi Eliezer says also korban asham, and he says kachatas v'ka asham. Good pasuk. Good. The pasuk does say kachatas v'ka asham. So what do the rabbis learn from kachatas v'ka asham, from the juxtaposition of chatas and asham? Lo malach to say to you, machatas tuna smicha, af asham ton smicha. Well, just like chatos, you need to do smicha, you have to lean on the head of the animal with all of your weight. The same must be done with an asham as well, as they are juxtaposed to one another. Kachatos v'cha asham. Okay, and now we move on to the next section of today's daf, slaughtering other korbanis as chatas and pesach. This is the opinion of Yosef ben Choni in our Mishnah, who had said, you know, his opinion was that just like a chatas or a pesach that is slaughtered as, let's say, shlamim, would be possible. And pesach, of course, bismano. This is going to be kind of part of the whole discussion now. But anyways, just like a chatas or a korban pesach are slaughtered for a different, you know, as a different korban, shelo lishmo, so they are possible. Well, guess what? Any other korban that's slaughtered as them are also possible. So, for example, a korban shlamim slaughtered as a korban chatas is also going to be possible. So when we say that a korban shlamim that's slaughtered shelo lishmo is kshera, not necessarily. A korban shlamim slaughtered as a korban chatas is actually psula, according to Yosef ben Choni. And this is probably going to be the more complex part, I think, of today's stuff. But here we go. It's going to be gewaldig. I have a feeling we can handle it. Okay. Says the Gemara. So Yosef ben Choni Omer and Nishchaten Chulei. Okie dokie. This is the opinion of Yosef ben Choni that we just mentioned. Omer b'Yoise, Omer b'Yechanan. Oh, so we have machlekes Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbah. Says Rabbi Yechanan, Yosef ben Choni v'Rab Eliezer. We haven't yet seen Rabbi Eliezer, but we will momentarily. Amru davar echad. So Rabbi Yechanan's opinion is that Yosef ben Choni and Rabbi Eliezer have identical opinions. We haven't seen this Rabbi Eliezer yet. Don't worry. This is not the Rabbi Eliezer who says that an asham shelo lishmah is psula. It's not that. We'll see Rabbi Eliezer's opinion momentarily. But says Rabbi Yochanan that Yosef ben Choni and Rabbi Eliezer have identical opinions. Rabba Omar says Rabba be'acherim l'shem chatas plige. Okay. Whereas Rabba says, look, their opinion is identical with regard to korbin pesach. Both would agree, both Yosef ben Choni and Rabbi Eliezer would agree that if one were to slaughter at the time of the korbin pesach a korbin shlomim, let's say, as a korbin pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, the one time a year when you can actually slaughter a korbin pesach. If at that time one were to slaughter a shlomim as a korbin pesach, both Yosef ben Choni and Rabbi Eliezer would agree that shlomim slaughtered as a korbin pesach would be pasul. Where they disagree is with regard to what if all year round, because you can always bring a korbin chatas if you need to. If one ate chaylev by accident, you bring a korbin chatas any day of the year. So all year round. So where they disagree is what if somebody slaughters a korbin shlomim as a korbin chatas all year round. Yosef ben Choni, of course, his opinion in the Mishnah is that shlomim would be possible, just like if one slaughters a chatas as a shlomim, the korbin's possible. So also somebody slaughters a shlomim as a chatas, the korbin is possible. That's the opinion of Yosef ben Choni. Rabbi Eliezer, though, according to Rabbi Eliezer, would disagree here and say that a shlomim slaughtered as a chatas is taka kosher. Rabbi would disagree there. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's a lot of names over here, which is why I'm kind of going a little slow. According to Rabbi Yochanan, Yosef ben Choni and According to Rabbi Yochanan, Yosef ben Choni and Rabbi Eliezer's opinion are identical. According to Rabbi, Yosef ben Choni and Rabbi Eliezer agree by korbin pesach that if somebody, let's say, slaughters a shlomim as a korbin pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, the shlomim is pasul. Where they disagree is by a chatas. Yosef ben Choni says a shlomim slaughtered as a chatas is pasul. Rabbi Eliezer would say it's kosher. Now, here we go. Let's read this again, and then we will get moving. Although it's going to be a slow Gemara. It's you got to work through this. Slow, methodically, because there's a lot of kavachomis. It's very logical. So we got to be clear on the logic here. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, Yosef ben Choni and Rabbi Eliezer have identical opinions. Rabba Omar says Rabba ba'acherim l'shem chatos plige, whereas Rabba says that they agree by korbin pesach, but they disagree by korbin chatos. Or maybe this is uchdetanya. Okay, so the Gos Habach says kidetanya. Fine. Ha-pesach she'avra shnaso. Okay, so if you have a korbin pesach she'avra shnaso, it's too old. It's more than a year old. It can't be offered as a korbin pesach anymore. Ushchato bizmano lishmah. Now a korbin. So if it's she'avra shnaso, if it's too old, it can't be slaughtered as a korbin pesach anymore. It would have to be slaughtered as we learned. Was this yesterday, I think, or the day before? I can't remember. We learned that a korbin pesach is slaughtered a moser a pesach, or whether it's too old or it's no longer the time or not the time. So then it cannot be slaughtered as a korbin pesach. It has to be slaughtered as any other korbin. So if this pesach, if this animal that's set aside as a korbin pesach, but it's now too old, and now it is the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, v'shchato bizmano lishmah, and it's slaughtered on the 14th of Pesach, on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon as a korbin pesach, that's of course going to be pasul. V'chein, and similarly, hashochet ashcherim l'shem pesach bizmano, And similarly, if one were to slaughter any korbin other than a kosher korbin pesach as a korbin pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, Rabbi Eliezer posa. Rabbi Eliezer says posel. Okay, so here we see that Rabbi Eliezer says that any korbin slaughtered as a korbin pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon is going to be posel, just like Yosef ben Choni had said. Okay. Rabbi Yeshua Machshir, Rabbi Yeshua says that the animal will be kosher. So here we see explicitly that Rabbi Eliezer says that with regard to Korban Pesach, if one slaughters, let's say, a shlamim on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon as a Korban Pesach, that shlamim is going to be posel, which is why both Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbah agree that when it comes to Korban Pesach, Yosef ben Choni and Rabbi Eliezer agree that, let's say, a shlamim, I'm going to use a shlamim as the example of any animal, that a shlamim slaughtered as a korban pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon is going to be posel. But we don't see in the brisa what Rabbi Eliezer would say about slaughtering a shlamim as a korban chatas. This is what we're going to be trying to figure out. Rabbi Yochanan concludes that Rabbi Eliezer agrees with Yosef ben Choni with regard to slaughtering a shlamim as a korban chatas, that it's posel, whereas Rabbah concludes that, and with good reason, as we'll see at the end of the sugya, but Rabbah concludes that Rabbi Eliezer says that a korban shlamim slaughtered as a korban chatas would be kosher. But okay, let's read that again. Tetanis will learn about pesach she'ava shnaso ushchato bezmanu lishmo. It was slaughtered on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon as a korban pesach. V'chen ashoichet acherim l'shem korban pesach bezmanu. Similarly, if one were to slaughter, let's say, a korban shlamim or any other korban as a korban pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, Rabbi Eliezer posel. Rabbi Eliezer says posel. Rabbi Yeshua machshir. Rabbi Yeshua says kosher. Now we're going to be okay. So now for the rest of this sugya, we are going to be working through a dialogue, a back and forth between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua about is these other animals slaughtered as a korban pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, is it posel like Rabbi Eliezer says? Is it kosher like Rabbi Yoshua says? Rabbi Yoshua is going to argue it's kosher. Rabbi Eliezer is going to argue it's posel. And Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbah are going to draw conclusions from the positions of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua in terms of Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbah are going to draw their conclusions about what Rabbi Eliezer would say in terms of slaughtering a Korban Shlamim, let's say, as a Korban chatas all year round. Rabbi Yoshua says to Rabbi Eliezer, in bishar, remember, Rabbi Yoshua says it's kosher, right? A shlamim, let's say, slaughtered on Erev Pesach in the afternoon as a Pesach is kosher. Rabbi Yoshua says to Rabbi Eliezer, in bishar yemos hashoneh, if the rest of the year, she'eino kosher lishmah, acherim ksherim lishmah. Look, when it comes to Korban Pesach, the entire year, except for this one day, the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, not even a whole day, the afternoon of one day. So says Rabbi Yeshua, look, if in the entire year, all year round, a Korban Pesach slaughtered as a Korban Pesach is posel, and yet any other animal slaughtered as a Korban Pesach the rest of the year, kosher. Right? It's only in the after, right? Even when Yosef ben Choni says, posel, an animal slaughtered as a korban pesach is posel, and also Rabbi Eliezer, that's on the 14th in the afternoon. But the rest of the year, if an animal, if any korban, let's say a shlam, were to be slaughtered as a korban pesach, the rest of the year, it would be kosher. So now, a korban pesach slaughtered as a korban pesach the rest of the year is posel, and yet any other korban slaughtered as a korban pesach the rest of the year is kosher. The only animal that can't be slaughtered as a korban pesach is a korban pesach. Now comes the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, and a korban pesach slaughtered as a korban pesach, for once, is kosher. Certainly now, all of these other korbanos, which the entire year round can be slaughtered as a korban pesach, even when the korban pesach itself is puzzle, they are kosher to be slaughtered as a korban pesach. Certainly now, on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, even the korban pesach slaughtered as a korban pesach is kosher. Certainly now, these other animals are also kosher. That is Rabbi Yeshua's argument. I'm going to start from the beginning of the argument. Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yeshua, in Bishar Yemos Hashana, if the rest of the year she'eino kosher lishmo, that a korban pesach is possible if slaughtered as a korban pesach, acherim ksherim lishmo, but the rest of the entire year, any other korbin can be slaughtered as a korbin pesach and would be kosher. So bismano, on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, shehu kosher lishmo, that finally a korban, even a korban pesach can be slaughtered as a korban pesach and be kosher on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon. Eino din, certainly sheyachshiru acherim lishmo, certainly then all of the other korbanis would also be kosher, slaughtered as a korban pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon. Omer lo Rabbi Eliezer, o chiluf advarim. Rabbi Eliezer says, that's a slippery slope, because I could actually make, if you want to play that game and go with that kind of a logic, well, I will come to a conclusion using your very own logic, and I will come to a crazy conclusion that's obviously not true. Let's say the opposite. Uma im bishar yemos hashana she'enu kosher lishmo kosher hu l'shem acherim. Right, based on that logic, that like if we're going to say that like, well, the korban pesach all year round is puzzle, but now it's kosher, so let's just say that all the things are kosher. Well, let's say this. Well, how about this? A korban pesach, the entire year round, can be slaughtered for any korban other than a korban pesach, as we know. We learned about this on, I can't remember, Daf Tes maybe? Daf Ches even? I can't remember. So if a korban pesach, the entire year, is kosher to be slaughtered as any korban, just not a korban pesach, well now, on the 14th of Nisan, in the afternoon, when a korban pesach can even be slaughtered as a korban pesach, certainly then, on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, a korban pesach should be allowed to be slaughtered for any korban you want, which is absurd. But Rabbi Yeshua, if that's your logic, that we like compare what happens the rest of the year and say, and yet a korban pesach for itself is puzzle, and therefore on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, when a korban pesach is kosher, certainly then all those other things that are kosher will definitely be kosher now. Well, then I can make this absurd argument that if a korban pesach the entire year can be slaughtered as any other korban, even though it can't be slaughtered for itself, certainly then on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, when it can be slaughtered for itself, when it is kosher to be slaughtered as korban pesach, certainly it can be slaughtered as any korban you want, which is absurd. Right, so again, Rabbi Eliezer responds to Rabbi Yeshua, I'll say the opposite. I'll switch things up. If the rest of the year, she'eino kosher lishmo, when the korban pesach is not allowed to be slaughtered as a korban pesach, kosher hu l'shem acherim, it can be slaughtered for other korban, as a different korban, as let's say a shlomim, bismano shu kosher lishmo, on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, when finally it can be slaughtered as a korban pesach, eino din sheyuchshor l'shem acherim, certainly then it should be able to be slaughtered as any korban you want, which is absurd. V'yuchshor pesach barba aser shelo lishmo, and we'll now say that a korban pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon is kosher shelo lishmo, which is absurd. And we know from the first Mishnah that a korban pesach on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon has to be lishmah. Shelo lishmah is possible. V'kacha to omer. And is what you're going to say? Really, Rabbi Yeshua? Is this really where would you really be okay with such an absurd argument? Mali huchshu acherim b'shari mos hashono lishmo shekain hu kosher l'shem acherim. So now here comes Rabbi Eliezer's argument. And says Rabbi Eliezer, actually, this is how we have to be thinking about the comparison between the rest of the year and Erev Pesach, etc. I'm going to read that again. Mali huchshu acherim b'shar yemos hashana lishmo. Look. The rest of the year, other korbanis can be slaughtered as a korbin pesach. Shekein hu kosher l'shem acherim. The rest of the year, let's say a shlam could be slaughtered as a korbin pesach because what goes around comes around. Because also a korbin pesach the rest of the year can be slaughtered as a shlam. So kilu goes both ways. So the rest of the year, a korbin pesach could be slaughtered as a shlamim. A shlamim could be slaughtered as a korbin pesach. It's mutual. But v'yuchshu acherim bizmanu lishmo shikein hu pasul l'shem acherim. But the thing is, on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, this is no longer the case. On the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, a Pesach cannot be slaughtered as a shlamim, and therefore, says Rabbi Eliezer, a shlamim also cannot be offered as a korbin Pesach. That is why Rabbi Eliezer concludes, as he does, that on Erev Pesach, in the afternoon, the 14th of Nisan, in the afternoon, other korbanos cannot be slaughtered as a korbin Pesach. And Rabbi Yochanan, and this is where Rabbi Yochanan draws his conclusion to say that Rabbi Eliezer and Yosef ben Choni are in cahoots. Because what's the logic here? The logic here is that if the korbin Pesach is possible to be slaughtered as another korbin, well then other korbanis cannot be slaughtered as it. Right? If the rest of the year a korbin Pesach could be slaughtered as a shlamim, so then a shlamim could be slaughtered as a korbin Pesach. But on Erev Pesach, when a Pesach cannot be slaughtered as a shlamim, well then a shlamim cannot be slaughtered as a korbin Pesach, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan concludes that logic would also carry over to a korbin chatas. That if a korbin chatas cannot be slaughtered as a shlamim, let's say, so then a shlamim cannot be slaughtered as a korbin chatas. And that is Yosef ben Choni's opinion, that both by Pesach and by chatas, if other korbanos are slaughtered as a Pesach or a chatas, pasul. Rabbi Yochanan concludes that Rabbi Eliezer would hold the same exact way by both chatas and korbin Pesach. Amar Rabbi Yeshua responds to Rabbi Eliezer, Imkeno right the koach Pesach v'nasata koach b'shlam. Rabbi Yeshua says to Rabbi Eliezer, but if that is the case, you are basically weakening the position of the korbin Pesach vis-a-vis the korbin shlamim, and we know that the korbin Pesach is more stringent than the korbin shlamim. After all, korbin Pesach has to be slaughtered lishmah. It's more stringent. So, and it says Rabbi Yeshua to Rabbi Eliezer, you are weakening the position of the korbin Pesach relative to that of korbin shlamim. How so? Well, because the rest of the year, a korbin Pesach can be slaughtered as a korbin shlamim, which means that shlamim is like a big deal, right? If other people can be slaughtered as it, so then that makes it kind of chashuv. And right, so the entire year is the time of the korbin shlamim. You could bring a korbin shlamim all year round, and a korbin Pesach can be brought as a korbin shlamim. That makes shlamim a big deal. And yet, the one time a year when it's actually the time to shine for the korbin Pesach, a shlamim can't be offered as a korbin Pesach, meaning a Pesach is like kind of limited in its influence in that sense, that when it's its time by the korbin Pesach, a shlamim can't be offered as a korbin Pesach. So as a korbin Pesach, so while a korbin Pesach can be offered as a shlamim can't be offered as a korbin Pesach. It kind of weakens the korbin Pesach in a certain sense, and we want the korbin Pesach to be strong. So Chazor Rabbi Eliezer v'donu din acher. So Rabbi Eliezer took a different approach and explained his rationale another way, which is Matzinu Moser Pesach ba Shlomim ve'ein Moser Shlomim ba Pesach. We have seen that a leftover korban Pesach can be offered as a shlomim, right? Say you set aside an animal to be a korban Pesach, it got lost, so you slaughtered a different one, and then some later point you find the original, so you bring it as a korban shlom. So a Moser Pesach can be offered as a shlomim. Now that's not the case by a korban shlomim. A Moser Shlomim would not be offered as a korban Pesach. I don't know how you would have exactly a Moser Shlomim. I don't know, maybe if you set aside two, you have to bring a korban Shlomim, so you set aside two animals, and then you just in case something happens to one, let's say, but everything went great with the first one, so now you have the leftover one, but yeah, okay, you definitely wouldn't be offering that as a korban Pesach. Okay, so we see that leftover korban Pesachs are offered as Shlomims, but leftover Shlomims are not offered as korban Pesachs. Uma Pesach shemosar ba Shlomim shchato bezmano l'shum Shlomim pasul. Now, the korban Pesach, which we already know that there are kind of types of korban Pesachs that are offered as Shlomims, right? A Mosar Pesach could be offered as a Shlomim, and yet, when we're talking about the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, a korban Pesach is not allowed, right? It has to be slaughtered lishmah, cannot be offered as a korban Shlomim. Well, the Shlomim she'ein mosarin ba Pesach. Well, a korban shlomim, which to begin with is never brought as, there's never a reason to bring a korban shlomim as a korban Pesach to begin with. Well, then im shchotum l'shem Pesach bizmano enu din sheyihu psulim. Well, then certainly when it's time for the korban Pesach, and the question is, can you slaughter a korban shlomim, which we have no precedent really to say that you should be bringing the korban shlomim as a korban Pesach, and now it's the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon, and it's actually the time of the korban Pesach. Can you slaughter a korban shlomim as a korban Pesach? No. Givaldic. But now, Omar Lo, Rabbi Yoshua says to Rabbi Eliezer, but based on that logic though, Matzinu Moser Chatos Ba'ola, we know that a Moser Chatos could be offered as an Ola. For example, if you set aside, let's say, two korbanis, right? You have to bring a korban chatas, so you set aside two animals, right? Just in case something happens to one, you have another one. You offered the first one, everything went great. So what do you do with the leftover? Well, you let it graze, and then it gets a mum, and it is offered as the kaitz mizbech, which is an ola. So moser chatas can be offered as an ola. Ve'en moser ola b'chatas, but there's no moser olas that are ever going to be offered as a chatas. Well, now, umachatas shemusar ba'ola shchata l'shem ola psula. Well, a korban chatas, which moser chatas is offered as an ola, and yet, shchata l'shem ola psula, right? A moser chatas is offered as an ola, and yet, if you have a korban chatas that you slaughter as an ola, it's psula. Well, then I would say that certainly ola she'ein moser b'chatas, a korban ola, where there's no moser ola being offered as korban chatas is to begin with, certainly then, shochata l'shem chatas eino din shetei psula. Certainly then, I would argue that if one would slaughter a ola as a chatas, it would be psula. And Rabbi Yoshua seems to make the argument that that's not the case, that an ola can be offered as a chatas. No, so what just happened? This was important. This is important what just happened. Basically, what Rabbi Yoshua's argument is he's saying to Rabbi Eliezer, based on your logic about the Moser Pesach Korv Shlomim thing, if that's the conclusion that you're going to draw, Rabbi Yeshua says to Rabbi Eliezer, if that's your conclusion, well then I'll end up at the conclusion that a korban ola that we know from the first Mishnah in Zevachim, that a korban ola that's slaughtered shalol lishmah is kshera. But Rabbi Yeshua says, based on your logic, Rabbi Eliezer, a korban ola slaughtered as a korban chatas should be psula, since there's no moser ola, korban chatas, etc. It should be psula. Now here's the thing. What does Rabbi Eliezer answer? He doesn't say, yes, I know. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, yes, that's exactly correct. That just like a korban chatas, and that's slaughtered for any other korban is possible, that shalol lishmah is possible, also any korban slaughtered as a korban chatas is also possible. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say that. Instead, he says, no. A korban ola, slaughtered as a korban chatas, is kosher, but your logic, Rabbi Yeshua, is not sound because Rabbi Eliezer responds, Look. Says Rabbi Eliezer to Rabbi Yeshua, a korban ola, slaughtered as a korban chatas, is going to be kshera, because a korban chatas, all year round, slaughtered as itself as a korban chatas, is a kosher korban, right? All year round, if a person needs to be korban chatas and it's slaughtered as a korban chatas, it's kshera. So therefore, also an ola slaughtered as a korban chatas is going to be kshera as well. Tomar b'pesach she'eno kosher lishmo ela bizmano. Korban pesach almost entirely, 99% of the year, a korban pesach cannot even be slaughtered as itself. And since most of the time, even a korban pesach can't be offered as a korban pesach, well then, other korbanis can't be offered as a korban pesach either. So Rabbah, for good reason, draws his conclusion from here. So Rabbi Eliezer is saying that other korbanos offered slaughtered as a korban pesach are possible, but an ola slaughtered as a korban chatas, other korbanos slaughtered as a korban chatas, are ksherim. So Rabbah says, you see from here that Rabbi Eliezer holds that other korbanos slaughtered as a korban chatas are kosher. So therefore, says Rabbah, Rabbi Eliezer agrees with Yossi ben Choni with regard to korban pesach, that other korbanos slaughtered as a korban pesach are possible. But in terms of chatas, Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. Yosef ben Choni says other korbanos slaughtered as a korban chatas are possible. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and says other korbanos slaughtered as a korban chatas are kosher. And now getting up to the final section of today's daf, the opinion of Shimin, achi, Azarya. If you remember from the Mishnah, the opinion of Shimin, achi, Azarya was that. So he be'etzem agrees with Bigadol with this concept of right, that when korbanis are slaughtered shelo lishmah, they're ksherin. Of course, the two exceptions being the korban chatas and the korban pesach. Now, but when we talk about these other korbanos, right? For example, if a korban ola is slaughtered shelo lishmah, it's kshera. It depends. If it's slaughtered as in asham, so then it will be ksher, because it's also they're both kachim. But if it's slaughtered as a shlomim, which is kachim kalim, then it will be psula. Part of the question that we're right. So he makes this distinction. So even within the korbanos that are ksherim shelo lishma, it also depends. We're talking about kachim. We're talking about kachim kalim. Now, there's a part of the question also is when he says kosher, how kosher? Does it mean that it's just kosher shelo all levalim shem chova, or does it mean actually like mamish kosher and even all levalim shem chova if it's like an upgrade from kachim kalim to kachim? So these are questions that we are going to answer and get to the next Mishnah. Says the Gemara, so Shimin, achi, Azarya, Omer, v'chulei, Rav Ashi, masni mishmei de Reb Yochanan, Rav Acha, Brei, de Rava, masni mishmei de Reb Yanai. My time the Shimin, achi, Azarya. How come Shimin, achi, Azarya says this kachim kalim, kachim? Because the pasuk says v'leichalu Hashem es kachim b'nei Yisrael asher yarimu la'Hashem. Well, it says that they will not be mechalel the kachim b'nei Yisrael when they are asher yarimu la'Hashem. When it's an upgrade, you're not going to cause trouble with an upgrade. So going from kachim to kachim kalim, no, the opposite. Going from kachim kalim to kachim, that is going to be fine. There's not going to be any issue over there. B'murim me'en ein mischalin. By upgrading, there isn't any issues. B'namuch me'en mischalin. But a downgrade, there's going to be issues there. So kachim to kachim kalim. So like an ola to a shlomim, that's going to be possible. But a shlomim to an ola is going to be kosher. So 1 second, this pasuk of v'leichalu is kachim b'nei Yisrael asher yarimu la'Hashem, that's needed for this to say an upgrade is kosher and a downgrade is possible. It's needed for Shmuel, the Amr Shmuel. Minayin the ochel es a tevel shuv misa. How do we know that somebody who eats tevel, produce that needs to be tithed but has not yet been tithed, how do we know that somebody who eats that produce is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim? Shenemar Babble says v'leichalalu as kodshei b'nei Yisrael es asher yarimu la'Hashem, from that same pasuk. Because es asher yarimu la'Hashem, that they will separate Trumas Meisers from, but they haven't yet. It's tevel. Basidim l'soma kosum v'daber. It's talking about produce that will be tied, but is as of yet untied. And it says v'lo yichalu, and Rashi points out this Gzeir Shav. It says by truma umesu bo ki yichalaluhu, which is misa b'dei shamayim. So both by tevel and by eating truma, if you're not a non-kohen, so then it is misa b'dei shamayim. So it seems like the pasuk is being used for that drasha by tevel. So if that was the case, that it was only coming to teach our scenario of the upgrade being kosher and the downgrade being puzzle, lichtov kra asher hurmu. It could say v'leichalalu es kodshei b'nei Yisrael asher hurmu la'Hashem, and you would still be able to preserve that limud about upgrades being kosher and downgrades being puzzle. Ma'asher yarimu. Why did I have to talk about that they will in the future separate truma from? Is because to also teach about tevel. Shmamina Tarte is teaching both things, that tevel is misa b'dei shamayim, and also that an upgrade is kosher and a downgrade is possible. Boy, Reb Zera asks, Sharon ve'ein miratzin v'chi polig b'chada polig, or the muksheinu miratzin v'tarte pliges. So Reb Zera asked the question that I mentioned a few minutes ago, that when Shimin achi Azarya, what exactly is he? Or what's he disagreeing about? Obviously, he's disagreeing about the kachim kalam thing, right? That in Ola isn't automatically kosher if it's shalol lishmah. It depends. It would have to be to another kachim, but a downgrade to kachim kalam would actually be possible. So he certainly disagrees about that. But let me ask you a question. When Shimin achi Azarya says that a shlamim slaughtered as in Ola is kosher, does that mean like the Tanakama says kosher? It's not possible. It's kosher, but lo alu lavalim shem chova. Or maybe when a shlamim is slaughtered as an ola, an upgrade, slaughtered as kachim kalim, is slaughtered as a kachim, maybe it's even alu lavalim shem chova. Maybe it's mamish kosher. In which case he's arguing on 2 points. One, the distinction between kachim and kachim kalim, and secondly, that from kachim kalim to kachim, it's actually mamish. It's mamish kosher. It's even miratzah. So again, by Reb Zera asks, Ksherin ve'ein miratzah? When Shimin achi Azarya says, Ksherin, that a kachim kalim to kachim is ksherin, does that mean ksherin ve'ein miratzin? Like the Tanakama says, v'chi polig b'chada polig, and he's only arguing in terms of the kachim kalim distinction? O dilma, ksherin miratzin. Or maybe he's saying, ksherin, maybe Shimin achi Azarya is saying ksherin, and it's even alul valim shem chova v'tartipli. He's arguing about 2 things. So Amar Abaye, it says Abaye v'yitemer Reb Zrika Toshma. Come here. HaBechor v'amayser. It says in our Mishnah, HaBechor v'amayser sheshchoten l'shem shlam. If a bechor or a meiser, which is kachim kalim, is slaughtered as a shlamim, which is also kachim kalim, ksherim, they're ksherim. Shlam shchoten l'shem bechor or l'shem meiser. However, a korbin shlamim, which is kachim kalim, slaughtered as bechor or meiser, which is also kachim kalim, psulim, because there's even layers, there's even hierarchies within kachim kalim. A korbin shlamim is on a higher level than a bechor and a meiser, because shlamim has does it say over here all the things that it has? But I think because it has, I don't know if it's all of them, but it has smicha, it has tenufa, it has nisachim. I don't know if all of those are missing by Bechor and Meiser, or just some of them, but anyways, but because the Korban Shlomim has more things, it's actually on a higher level than Bechor and Meiser, even though they're all Kachim Kalim. Now, so our Mishnah had said that, right? That Shlom slaughtered as Kachim, Shlom slaughtered as Bechor and Meiser is possible, but Meiser and Bechor slaughtered as Shlom is kosher. Now, v'isal kadaitech ksherin meratzin, and if it enters your mind that Shimin achi Azarya is talking about not just kosher, but also miratzin, like it fulfills some obligation, well then, Bechor bar ritzuye hu? But the thing is, a bechor, what's a bechor? A firstborn male animal is offered as a korbin. What happens if something goes wrong with that korbin? So right, let's say it was, I don't know, slaughtered incorrectly or whatever. Something goes wrong with that korbin. You don't have to bring a replacement. It's a bechor, it's the firstborn. You don't have another firstborn. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. So it's not like a korbin chatas where if something goes wrong, you have to bring a different korbin chatas. Like it's actually maratza. You fulfilled your obligation in that sense. A bechor is not like that. So because we're bringing examples in our Mishnah, bechor and meiser, examples where if something goes wrong, you don't have to bring replacements. Like, this was the bechor, this was the meiser. If it didn't work out, it didn't work out. So therefore, Ela ksherin ve'ein meratzin. So rather, clearly when it comes to bechor and meiser, we're talking about ksherin ve'ein meratzin, because meratzin is not shaykh to bechor and meiser. It's not like the kind of thing that like you have to bring a replacement if it goes wrong. Like it is what it is, and if it doesn't, something goes wrong, so you weren't able to bring it. We don't have to like replace it. It's like you have a looming chofa. Umid the seifa ksherin ve'ein meratzin, and therefore, if by the seifa by bechor and meiser it's ksherin ve'ein meratzin, so reisha nami ksherin ve'ein meratzin. So therefore, we want to say also that begadol, Shimin achi Azarya's opinion is that even a shlomim slaughtered as a ola, when we say it's kosher but not meratz, like the Tanakama was saying. The korbin is kosher, but it would not fulfill any obligations. If he had a shlom that he had to bring, we'd have to bring a different one. Midi irya kadisa v'kadisa, to which we say, wait, you could say, look, when the Mishnah talks about bechor and meiser, so there it's kosher ve'ein meratzah because it's not a meratzin kind of korbin. However, when it comes to shlomim as being offered as an ola, you could say there kosher u'meratzah, kilu, each korbin for what is relevant to it. Bechor and meiser, meratzah is not relevant, but shlomim it is. So for bechor and meiser, it's kosher ve'ein meratzin. By shlomim, you could say kosher u'meratzin. Elamai kamaj malon. If that's the case, well then, what is the Mishnah teaching us by mentioning bechor and meiser and shlomim? Gavoa v'namuch, what? It's teaching kamo v'namuch kamashma. What? It's just teaching us that there's like different statuses, and if you go up, then kosher, and down, possible. But Tanina, the Mishnah already said, Kate said, kodshim sheshchotan l'shem kodshim kalim chule. The Mishnah already talked about it. If you have kodshim, slaughtered as kodshim kalim, it's possible. Kodshim kalim, slaughtered as kodshim kosher, kelu. The Mishnah already taught about hierarchies. So then why do we have to then go further and say, Shlomim slaughtered as pesach and as bechor and meiser is possible? We already taught about hierarchies. So if all it is to talk about hierarchies, not to tell us anything about being maratza or not, why mention it? Well, I'll tell you why. Maudetema may have thought kodshim v'kodshim kalim hu deika gavoa v'nomuch. I may have thought, well, no, the whole Mishnah is teaching about hierarchies. Kodshim and kodshim kalim, shlomim and bechor / meiser. The reason why we need to teach all of them is because if we would only have kodshim and kodshim kalim, okay, that's pretty clear, right? Dika gavoa v'nomuch, okay, clearly kodshim are higher, kodshim kalim are lower. Aval kalim v'kalim, but within kodshim kalim, a shlomim which is kodshim kalim, and bechor and meiser which is also kodshim kalim. That the fact that there are hierarchies even within kodshim kalim, I would not have known that. I would not have known that. But one second, hanami tanina. But there is actually another Mishnah on Daf Peites that says this, Shlomim korbin bechor, that if you have a shlomim and a bechor to slaughter, the shlomim is going to be offered first, because a shlomim needs to goes on all four sides of his back, whereas a bechor only goes on matana achas. V'smicha v'nesochim v'tinufas chazav v'shok. Okay, there's the answer. Okay, it requires also smicha nesochim tinufas chazav v'shok. Masha ein kain by bechor. So we have that already taught as well, that there's this hierarchy between shlomim and bechor / meiser. Ha ikar agrora nascha. To which the Gemara answers, yeah, but this is the main sugya. Here on the first daf of Masechtas Zevachim, this is really where we learn that there are hierarchies even within kodshim kalim, that the shlomim is on a higher level than the bechor and the meiser. So this is real. So that is the chiddush to teach us that even within kodshim kalim there are hierarchies. and so it's not necessarily teaching that it's kosher ve'ein meratza. No, you could say that by Bechor and Meiser it's kosher ve'ein meratza, but by Shlomim it's kosher umeratza. Each thing is teaching its own thing, and we mention Shlomim and Bechor / Meiser to teach that there are actually hierarchies even within Kodshim Kalim. Okay, that was Daf Yud Aleph Masechtas Zevachim. How long was it? That must have been another long one. Ooh, that looks like it was probably another long one. And we still have a lot to do on the daf. I don't know. These dafs I don't know why they are taking so long. I feel like everything is just very, very detailed and just needs to be spoken out. But wow. We didn't even finish the daf, and it's like, I think it's hard for me to tell. I was looking at one, I have my backup recording, but that just runs the whole time. It's definitely much shorter than that, but it must have still been pretty long. Okay, friends, that was Daf Yud Aleph of Masechta Zevachim. The first section of today's daf, we talked about when blood of a korbin enters into the Heichal. There was a three-way machlokas. Rabbi Kiva said all korbanis, if their blood enters into the Heichal, the korbin is going to be possible. Rabbi Eliezer says only chatas and asham are possible, because Rabbi Eliezer says ka chatas ka asham. Right, even though the pasuk is only talking about chatas, he extends that to asham as well, because the pasuk says ka chatas ka asham, and the chacham say only a korban chatas is going to be possible if its blood enters into the heichal. We then talked about final comments on the asham lishmah debate. Of course, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is that an asham needs to be slaughtered lishmah. The Gemara I talked about, well, by mincha it also says ka chatas v'ka asham. Wouldn't there be a distinction there? Anyways, yeah, anyways, okay, we kind of wrapped up that discussion. Now, slaughtering other korbanis as chatas and pesach. So that was kind of the most detailed part of today's daf. I think that part probably took the longest. So when it comes to other korbanos being slaughtered as a korban pesach, so Rabbi Yoshua says that other korbanos slaughtered as a korban pesach are kosher. Rabbi Eliezer says not kosher. Okay, and now when it comes to other korbanos being slaughtered as a korban chatas, so the question is, what's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion on that? Rabbi Eliezer says possible, just like he says by korban pesach. Rabbi Eliezer says kosher. So by korban pesach, Rabbi Eliezer says possible, but by chatas, Rabbi Eliezer would say kosher. And finally, the opinion of Shimin achi Azarya, kodshim kalim to kodshe. Kodshim is kosher and it's even miratza. That was kind of the conclusion over there. We talked about hierarchies even within kodshim kalim, which is interesting. Chevre, that was Daf Yud Aleph of Masechta Zevachim. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.